Hi, thank you for joining. My name is Chris Hayden, and this is my presentation on Code of Ethics for San Diego State University Educational Leadership, EDL 655. I will start just by saying a little bit about why I chose the image here on this first slide. Really, it's to highlight the idea that much like spaceships, once they've taken off, it's very difficult to respond or get external help for problems that arise. And so, as leaders, we also have kind of a similar situation in educational settings where basically we may be in the air and we can't get the resources that we might hope that we could have. And so we basically have to deal with these problems that arise and deal with these issues that we encounter kind of on the fly. And so at best we can hope to have a solid plan for responding to and anticipating problems that we might encounter along our journeys. So I'll start with a bit of background in terms of the role of principals as moral agents. So basically, moral agency, according to Cherkowski et al. 2015, is one of the most important roles of principals in schools. Basically, right, you can think of agency as basically causing something to happen, and so moral agency is basically someone's ability or capacity to perform as an agent for moral action. And they highlight this idea that there are at least two components to this. So the person's own moral behavior, but also, and kind of maybe more important to note here, the moral influence that that person can have on the community and on others who are members of the community. And so that's something really important to note in terms of developing a code of ethics, is that the principal has the responsibility not just to behave morally, but to exert influence on others in the community and ensure that they have the modeled behavior, the support that they need, and structures in place in terms of the organizations to help them make decisions in a moral way. So they go on to kind of flesh out 5 domains of responsibility as a moral agent that principals have. The first, as we kind of mentioned a second ago, to engage as an ethical human being, right? So this means that the principal or the person in charge or the leader's own behavior is a really important responsibility that they have to their community as a moral agent. The second is to respect human rights and to always act basically with the public in mind, or their community's well-being in mind, and to build trust. They are to, of course, understand and appropriately apply curriculum and develop and manage organizational structures that will ensure that the vision and mission of the organization, in this case, particularly with respect to ethical dilemmas and solving ethical dilemmas, are met. And finally, this is one of the ones that I find most fascinating, but also I think one of the most important elements of principals as moral agents, and that's that they have responsibility to basically ensure that the school is an authentic learning community. And I think one of the most fascinating things that I've learned throughout this course is the idea that ethical dilemmas are some of the most challenging and complex problems that require higher order thinking. And this means that basically, if we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy or something like that, what we really want to be able to do is to build students' ability to respond ethically as ethical agents and as citizens and that kind of thing. So I really like that aspect of responsibility of principals as moral agents. In terms of preparation, so it's really important to note, and another key or take-home message from this is that the ability to make ethical decisions is not something that a student or a person is born with, and that really we have a responsibility as leaders to develop and improve our ability to make ethical decisions. And so we have a couple of different frameworks that we can use to help ensure that our response to these dilemmas is as good as it could be. And one of the things that we've been doing in this course is go through these different case studies. And really, those are not so much about identifying solutions that might be applied as they are to giving us practice, a stepwise approach to solving such dilemmas and problems. And so the first step is identifying, in this in a situation, whatever it is that encounters us, what's the primary ethical problem? Who are the stakeholders, and what ethical responsibilities do we have in terms of reducing harm to others? Well, I'll talk about this idea of multiple ethical paradigms, but also, it's important to think about and explicitly define what leadership actions and traits are important to solving that ethical dilemma to the best of our ability. And then I think I really like this because it reminds me of kind of like a design approach to project management and developing projects. But what are the alternative routes of action that we have, and how are we going to ensure that we have, a well thought out communication plan? So in terms of developing leaders to be moral agents, it's really important, I think, that we acknowledge that ethics and making ethical decisions is not something that we're born with, that it's a complex, higher order thinking skill that can be improved with practice. And basically, we have an obligation to ensure that leaders who are in this position have the experience and have the practice to make good ethical decisions. So, as a beginning leader, I think it's also important to note that that we also have an obligation to ensure that that new leaders have a sense of where they need to go and what they need to do. And so the article by Alvey and Robbins, I think, provides a nice kind of list of essential characteristics that, or like important points that leaders should recognize as they move into a leadership position. I think it's unethical to assume that new leaders basically have all of the answers without the practice that they would need to be successful. So the first of these would be to keep students at the heart, and I think that's if we can keep coming back to that learning is the center of everything we do as educators, everything that schools do, then many decisions become much easier to make. In terms of a leader, so it's important that we model or basically model this idea of being a learning leader and set example for constructive criticism-assisted growth. So this idea that we're critically examining our own performance, and when others see the leader do that, then they don't feel so bad about doing it for themselves. Yeah, I mean the big point here is that we want to act ethically, and this is really, or to do this, it's really important to consider perspective and know where our true responsibilities lie in the community, and remember that we have multiple stakeholders, not just maybe our board of directors, but also parents and teachers. We want to put instructional leadership first, and this means that basically our goal as principals, focusing on the first key point there, that learning is at the heart of everything we do. We're not separate from the teaching community that we lead, and they will respect and engage with us when they realize that we're trying to help them. I think it was interesting in this article as well that they mentioned basically, sometimes there's kind of like this negative light put on management But I think it's, as they note, really important to recognize the role that efficient and effective management has in kind of ensuring the community that there is a safety net and that there's strength and that the basic needs of the organization are being met. Yeah, building strong relationships. I think that this is fairly straightforward, but yeah, I mean organizations are built not simply on the members, but really on the relationships that they have with one another. And so this puts another kind of ethical emphasis on leaders to ensure that we're building strong relationships. We need to basically ensure that leaders are aware and conscious of this natural progression of stages, and so they kind of know that certain feelings or certain transitions are just part of the process. Of course, yeah, fostering school community partnerships. This is something that's really, really important. I would say that schools are built on community relations. And of course, yeah, we know that just kind of like in biology, which is the subject I teach, the most successful species in an evolutionary sense are the ones who are able to adapt and change with the coming times. And so we also have this responsibility to ensure that the schools and the teachers that make it up are committed to lifelong learning. So one of the key points to approaching ethical dilemmas is this idea of multiple ethical paradigms. And so, yeah, I mean, it's important to note that ethical dilemmas are complex, as we've got written here, but that doesn't mean that they're without structure. And in one of the videos that we watched, there was a pretty interesting quote by a gentleman who said something like, he had encountered hundreds and hundreds of different problems, but they all basically boiled down to a small handful of types, which means that actually with training and considering the right perspective, there's a high probability that these problems could be solved. So the multiple ethical paradigms, and there's more than these four here, but these are four that we really focused on as important to education, include the first in ethics of critique, right? And so this basically asks us to take a critical approach to the problem, often might challenge the status quo, help us recognize that there may be unstated values that are in place, and also help us to reflect and kind of get a better idea of how maybe our own morals have been modified or even corrupted over time. A different perspective here would be an ethics of justice, and this is basically, yeah, we have a rule book, and we have to abide by it. You can think of kind of basic rules like do no harm and things like that, but yeah, it's hard to find situations where those don't apply. Maybe challenging, maybe complex, maybe complicated, but at the end of the day, we really have to ensure that yeah, we are following the laws that have been laid out, that we have respect and a fair treatment for all. Kind of at the other spectrum is this idea of an ethics of care. And this one is actually really fascinating to me because in my current school, I feel like we've perhaps thrown this one out or at least overlooked some of the important aspects of it. So I mean, one of the most important aspects of this is that achievement is not the top priority of a school. As much as teachers and administrators and maybe even parents would think it is, we need to recognize a growth mindset and this idea that students need to be nurtured and encouraged. And this also forces us to look at multiple perspectives when we're making decisions. Finally, an ethics of profession. This basically highlights the idea that there are certain aspects in terms of solving ethical dilemmas and moral issues that are unique to education. And so how do we solve these? Well, it's from this perspective, it's really important to basically, rely on experience and how we've handled things in the past and communication. So we have these different paradigms, and we can draw on each of them as the situation may require. Um, and yeah, this idea that there's no single approach that applies to all situations, but that we have this toolkit and kind of a variety of different paradigms and ways to explore a problem with the hopes of coming to the best solution. So kind of along these lines, this idea of microethics and kind of having not a cheat sheet, but having a tool that you can use to help ensure that we're making the best decisions, recognizing this kind of fact of ethical dilemmas, that there's no kind of single set of rules that will allow us to navigate effectively through every situation. So rather than that, we have kind of these like big areas that we hope that ethical leaders can use to kind of ground and make decisions on. And so the first is learning. Yeah. So when faced with an ethical dilemma, we can consider, what is the learning that's coming out of this situation, right? How can we ensure that both staff and students are learning a lot, right? And that's an important consideration. How is the school improving as a result of this decision that is going to be made? And that kind of ties in. I guess I'll go a little bit backward. It's not meant to be actually a kind of a cyclical process as much as it is depicted here, but this idea of hope. So, do we assume positive intent? Are we giving others the benefit of the doubt? Are we doing the best that we can in this situation given the tools available? And so that's really important to instill and ensure that we're addressing this idea of hope. And also compassion, right? So, who needs support in this situation? How can we best support where those that are in need? And I think it's also a really great, a great kind of procedure to think about, what would I want if I were on the other end of this decision, and how would it feel? In terms of equity, right, this is a really major theme in education, so we need to make sure that we're ensuring equity is a part of our school. And this doesn't just mean, sorry, let me back up. The equity could apply to different cultures. It could apply to different, socioeconomic backgrounds, to different genders. There's a whole host of ways that equity can be challenged. And one of the guiding principles here is that we need to value diversity. And then finally, you could almost put communication at the center of all these, but are we listening to all relevant parties? And basically, are we, clearly relating the decisions and the rationale behind these things? And so that's going to be really important for building trust. So these kind of 5 areas help ensure that we have a code of ethics rather than just a code of conduct. So my own personal values, core values rather, going through a big list of these, it's a really challenging practice, but definitely I value achievement and excellence and expertise, cooperation, teamwork, growth, creativity, intuition, diversity, trust, honesty, and kind of, if I were to choose the most important from that list, I think I would focus on excellent growth, trust, and diversity. And then finally, I would narrow it down to growth and diversity, because I think that actually those 2 things, or those 2 core values, kind of recognizing how important growth is and doing everything that we can to ensure that our organization, that our school, that our teachers, that our students have what they need in order to grow, is kind of like the answer to all of our problems. And the flip side of that is diversity, and recognizing that people differ. And that means that there's no one solution or no one approach that's going to kind of work for everybody. And so I see this kind of idea of growth in the context of diversity as kind of like two sides of the same coin, and that we need to recognize diversity if we're going to allow for growth, but we also need to remember that growth is our primary goal for the organization, leading to excellence, leading to teamwork, leading to cooperation, creativity, intuition, and trust. So thank you. Coming back to this kind of image of a spaceship taking off, one big take-home message for me from this is that while we might see the spaceship launching into space, what we often lose track of is how much planning, how much preparation, how much monitoring, how much feedback, how many decisions were actually involved. And that's kind of why I've included that picture of the control room there. And I think this course is really about that control room, and that's what ethics is about as well. Not so much in the sense that we have to have control, but in the sense that there's a lot of complexity that's there, and as leaders we need to be well trained and have a good background and a good approach for handling all of the different things that might go wrong if we're going to have a successful launch. Thank you.